The wind carried a stillness that didn't belong to this dusty town. It wasn't the kind of silence that brought peace, it was the silence that came right before something changed forever. Sheriff Grady Palmer stood in the center of Main Street, hand firm on the grip of his revolver, eyes locked on the figure in front of him. His breath was shallow, and every instinct screamed threat. The woman was no outlaw, no bandit, but she walked with a purpose that rattled his gut. Her face, half hidden under a brimmed hat, told no stories. But her steps, they marched like history. "Stop right there," he barked. The woman didn't flinch. Dust curled around her boots. Her hands were at her sides, slow and steady. One man on the sidewalk whispered, "That's the widow from Dry Creek." "Ain't she been gone for years?" Grady gritted his teeth. He didn't care where she came from. This was his town, and no stranger walked in unchallenged, especially not now, when tensions were high and justice was sharp-edged. But then she did something that no one expected. She slowly raised her left sleeve. It was the kind of movement that shouldn't have caused chaos, but when the worn flannel slid up past her elbow, revealing flesh scorched with faded, blackened numbers, the sheriff's breath caught. His hand slipped from his gun. It clattered to the ground. Every voice on the street vanished. Burned numbers. Faded, ugly, deliberate. Grady stepped back like the woman had struck him. He'd seen scars. He'd worn a few. But this was a different kind of wound. One that didn't bleed anymore, but bled stories. Stories they had all tried to forget. Her name was Miriam Thorne. 20 years ago, she was the town blacksmith's daughter. Quick to laugh, quicker to speak her mind. But when war swept through the frontier and the cleansing raids began, she vanished, just another girl from the wrong bloodline taken in the night. Everyone thought she died with the others. Burned alive. Tossed into mass graves. But she didn't die. She survived. They branded her in Camp 19, etched numbers into her arm with fire-hot steel, numbers that turned her into property. She spent 5 years breaking rocks, sewing uniforms, burying children, and watching friends disappear. But survival was an act of rebellion. And when the camp was liberated, she was one of the few who still remembered her name. She left the country. Became a nurse in the outer territories. Quiet. Unassuming. A ghost with work to do. For 2 decades, she stitched up soldiers, fed orphans, learned to heal what the world had tried to break. But something always pulled her back to this place. Dry Creek. The place where no one fought for her. Where neighbors watched her dragged away and turned their heads. She returned not for revenge, but for reckoning. Grady picked up his revolver with shaking hands and holstered it, eyes glued to Miriam. We thought you were dead," she said softly. Her voice was like sandpaper over silk rough, but steady. "So did I, for a long time." The townspeople gathered like moths to a flame. Some gasped. Others wept silently. A few turned away, ashamed. Miriam looked around. "You all stood there. 20 years ago. When the soldiers came. You saw them drag my father through the mud. You watched them take me. You heard my mother scream." A heavy-set woman stepped forward, hat in hand, trembling. We were afraid. We didn't know what they'd do to us." Miriam nodded. "And I understand fear. I lived inside it. Slept beside it. Ate with it. But not one of you came for me." The silence that followed was unbearable. Then the sheriff, his voice cracking, said, "Why come back?" "Because there's a girl down the road," Miriam said. "Half-Rosalian. Her mother's gone. Her father's in chains for stealing bread. They're saying she'll be re-educated. That they'll mark her." The color drained from Grady's face. "She reminds me of me," Miriam whispered. "And I won't watch another child be burned into silence." She pulled from her satchel a stack of papers, identification records, testimony, orders signed in official ink. Legal power. Real protection. She laid them on the sheriff's desk that evening. You're the law, she said to Grady. Be worthy of the badge. Or step aside. The next day, the girl was freed. Her name was Emmeline. She clung to Miriam like a child grips a life raft, wide-eyed and untrusting. But Miriam didn't flinch. She moved her into the old boarding house and gave her a room with clean sheets and sunlight. Weeks passed. Then months. Some people still averted their eyes on the street. But more and more came knocking, not out of guilt, but with offerings. Bread. Books. Apologies, whispered clumsily through cracked lips. Grady visited often. He started sitting on Miriam's porch, asking questions no lawman ever asked, about justice, about fear, about how a town could go on pretending. And Miriam never blamed. She spoke calmly, with weariness earned the hard way. Forgiveness, she said, was a choice you made every morning. Not for others, but for yourself. One spring afternoon, Emmeline was playing in the yard when Miriam called her in. Come here, baby girl, she said. Emmeline came running. Yes, Miss Miriam? Miriam knelt, rolled up her sleeve, and showed her the numbers. Do you know what these are? Emmeline shook her head. They're the past, Miriam said, voice thick with something between sorrow and strength. They remind me of who I was, what I survived. But they don't tell me who I get to be now. Then she leaned close. And they'll never tell you who you are. Years later, long after Miriam passed, a statue stood at the edge of Dry Creek. A woman with her sleeve rolled up, arm raised, not in surrender, but in testimony. The plaque read,